Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the University of Manitoba's Tuesdays with TD webinar, Women and Finance. My name is Tracy Bowman. I'm the Executive Director of Alumni Relations and a very proud University of Manitoba alum. Before we begin, I'd like to share the University of Manitoba's land acknowledgement.
The University of Manitoba campuses are located on original lands of Anishinaabe, Ininewuk, Unsinanewuk, Dakota Oyete, and Dene, and on the national homeland of the Red River Métis. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration.
Thanks for that. So thank you everyone for joining us and making this event part of your day. So before I introduce our panelists, I did want to go through just a few housekeeping details. So if any of you have participated in our virtual programming before, you will know that we are recording today's session and then we upload them to our website for later viewing. And so the good thing about this is you can refer to this recording as many times as you'd like. And we also encourage you to share it with friends and colleagues alike. It will be on our University of Manitoba Tuesdays with TD YouTube channel soon. So we'll let you know when that happens. So we have allocated an hour for today's session, but there is a lot of content that we're excited to share with you. And so we will be saving questions and answers to the end, but know that if we go past 8 p.m., the three of us are staying here and we will get through as many questions as you like. If you have a hard stop at 8 p.m. and if your question's already been answered, feel free to leave the webinar when it works for you, but we will be going over if there's lots of questions. So know that we will do our best to answer as many questions as you have. So now I'd like to introduce our two guest presenters. So first is Danica Rico, and she's been with us for the past number of Tuesdays with TD webinars. She is a senior financial planner with TD Wealth. Danica has 17 years of experience in the financial services sector. She collaborates with her clients to identify what matters most to them and builds an investment portfolio to achieve their goals. Welcome, Danica. And our second panelist is Helen Lee, who is also a University of Manitoba alum. She is a trust officer with TD Wealth Private Trust, and Helen has been providing clients with wealth management solutions for the past 35 years, but specializing in estate and trust services for the past 10. And she focuses on building long-lasting relationships with you and your loved ones by providing continuity during the implementation of your financial and estate plan. So welcome, Helen. So before I turn it over to both Danica and Helen, I first wanted to do a huge shout out to our wonderful University of Manitoba affinity partner, TD Insurance, for whom without them we would not be here this evening. As I said, they're an important affinity partner with the University of Manitoba. So what that means is they offer travel, home, and vehicle insurance discounts to University of Manitoba alumni, student, staff, and faculty, as well as we just recently launched a partnership with TD Wealth on direct investing opportunities, also available to University of Manitoba alumni, student, staff, and faculty. So for more information, there's a little bit of information on the slide that you see before you, but for more, please go to the University of Manitoba Alumni Relations Benefits and Perks webpage, and you'll find a lot more details there. So with that, we're going to turn it over to Danica and Helen to take it away. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Tracy. And thanks, everybody, for joining me and us for this presentation. I wish I could see all your faces. I saw some familiar names when I was looking at the participation list there. So nice to see you guys and welcome for those of you that I know. This presentation is really going to be about women in finance, some considerations as we go through our life journey. And when we think about retirement and long-term planning, that starts from the moment that we graduate. In fact, it starts from the time that we start our post-secondary education, and all of the decisions that we make throughout our life are going to have different financial implications as we go through our journey together. And so this is really hopefully going to give you some nuggets of information that you can take away and implement in your life, regardless of what life stage that you're in. Our agenda for tonight, we're going to share a little bit about ourselves and talk about that because it's relatable and we all have our own stories that impact how we manage our finances. And then we're going to take you through 10 lessons. They're going to focus on planning for your future, building your net worth, How do we manage our debt and use it responsibly? How do we educate ourselves and feel prepared for the future? And ultimately, we want to make sure we're doing all of this while we're really being kind for ourselves. At the end, we're going to do that question and answers, as Tracy mentioned. And so when we get there, I hope that you feel comfortable enough to type in your questions so that we can keep that dialogue going. It's really challenging for me to be chatting with you guys when I have no idea how this is being received, and I would love to hear it back from you at some point in the conversation. Before I jump over to Helen to start with her story, I just want to give you guys a heads up. Clearly, based on my background, I'm working from home, just like many of us are today. And I have a dog who's sitting right over here. And I'm going to bring this up because at some point in this evening, he is likely going to bark or want to get out of the room. And so I may have to step away and continue talking and open that door. And I hope you guys have some patience for me if I have to do that. On that note, I'm going to send it over to Helen. And Helen, we'd love to hear a little bit about your backstory and how that relates to your financial picture.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Nice to virtually, I guess I didn't even see you, but thank you for having us here. For myself, I've been as you've seen, 35 years with TD, so I've been probably pretty a lifer. And ever since I graduated from university, or even while I was going to university, I started as a part-time teller, and I was there and never thought I would stay with TD at all, right? So never went in their pension plan, just there on part-time Saturdays, working as a teller until later on I decided this is something I like. So I continued on. I like TD so much that I kept saying to them, I'm just going to work in your branch for 1 year, and then I'm going to leave, move to the next step, and just keep on climbing, right? So that was great until we had our first child. Things start changing a little bit there. So pregnant and decided, okay, how are we doing our plan? Well, I would have liked my husband, myself to be part-time and look after raising our children, right? So we can both work part-time. He was a letter carrier, so he could work in the morning and then I could work in the later on, and we'd be home and we could look after our children. I knew choosing that route, things would have changed, right? Our finances would change, how we spend would change. Even my growth in the company would change, right? What I didn't expect was once my daughter was born, we went through a separation and filing divorce. So now this idea I had totally changed from what I started with. Now here I am, primary caregiver for a brand new baby. I was like, oh my goodness, what am I going to do now? Right. But what I did was I just sat and really think about what is it I still want? And based on that, I looked at my finances, and you're going to see based on those 10 lessons, they're like the fundamentals. Do I have that in place and look at my finances? And can I do that? And actually, I was able to do that. Looking at all my expenses, basing on what my salary was, I was able to, buy a house. I was able to put my daughter through school. I was able to, for myself, get, a better education as I was going. I only started working, come back to full-time 10 years ago, and that was it. So my life has changed, my finances has changed. But if you have those fundamentals down, making sure you don't have debt, making sure that you save in the long term, those are going to help you. And we know change do happen. So what we have to do is always try to figure out is how can we lessen that impact of any change, right? So having those fundamentals are really important. And I definitely hope you learn from those 10 lessons that we're going to provide you. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Helen. What about you, Tracy? Let's share a little bit about your story.
Yeah, thanks. So from a professional and financial point of view, so I'm sure probably some of you may have had this situation as well, but I've been laid off not once, but twice from different jobs over my career. The first time was when I worked for Parks Canada and the federal government. And the second time is when I worked for a private consulting IT company in a marketing capacity. Now, both of those layoffs like many layoffs are the result of cost-saving measures. And so the first time when I was working for the federal government, 33% of Parks Canada employees right across the country were laid off. In the office in Winnipeg that I was in, where there was more higher earning professionals in the office, 66% of the employees were laid off. And then when I got laid off from the private consulting company, it was the entire marketing and sales department was laid off. And so if any of you have had that situation, I'm sure this is a similar feeling, is that I had a lot of self-doubt. I was really thinking about, like, am I, like, I really had concerns about my self-worth. Am I contributing to my household? I never imagined a time that I wouldn't work. I always found that was important to me as a person to be a better partner and a better mother, to be able to work. And so that next day, when you don't have a place to go, really does play on your mind. And what does that mean? I am thankful, though, that I have transferable skills. So I was able to find employment relatively quickly both times. But I still I had a lot of, I went through all the things that you do when these sorts of, I was grieving, if you will, these different jobs, the people that I was with. And it did impact our financial situation as well. I am married, and so there's two of us that contribute to the household, but we made the decision that both of us have contribute to the household, and so that impact of me not working did play a role. So, anyways, I'm now celebrating. It'll be 8 years next month at the University of Manitoba. I've never been happier. So it all worked out, but there was difficulty over my career. So I'll end it there, and then Danica, maybe you want to share your story.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, guys, for sharing both of your stories. I spent a lot of time reflecting on my story before starting this presentation and what I wanted to share with you. And so first, I thought maybe I would share back the fact that my career was held back for 8 years because I was considered of childbearing years at the early onset. And then I thought I maybe would share some stats around my industry being still male dominated, with 52% of women advisors feeling that sexism exists within the workplace. And I can tell you that I've experienced that through my career. But I decided that those don't define me. I've been in the financial industry for 18 years now, because it came into 2025 recently. And I faced many challenges through my career progression. But I'm happy to say that I'm exactly where I wanted to be right now, supporting my clients and providing their families with financial plans that encompass their unique needs. But I also have two boys. I've got a 10-year-old and a 12-year-old. And this has posed a lot of challenges for me, particularly around the dependency of child rearing and the guilt that I've felt as a result of being a type A personality who works a lot and doesn't see quitting anytime soon. I've had a husband who's moved through his career, and that's had financial implications, going through an apprenticeship program to a journeyman to quitting the field altogether and starting his own business. And so together we faced a lot of challenges, but I'm grateful that he's open-minded and supportive and willing to acknowledge my feelings and have conversations about where we want to go within our life. In 2019, I experienced the loss of my dad. And as a result, I stepped away from my work and really put it on the back burner for the entire year, focusing on his cancer diagnosis and then his eventual passing. And so pausing my career for a moment gave me the opportunity to reevaluate and look at what matters most. I'm also a super avid gardener. I don't know if you can see behind me, but I'm growing my seed starts, and I've got peppers that are growing already. And it's really important to me that soil is a critical point of our health. And it's also important for me to educate my children on being sustainable and growing their own food for their future and for future generations. And so I wanted to share all of that because all of these are parts of me, and all of them have financial implications to them. And so as you're listening to this presentation, I want you to reflect on your own life and your own trials and tribulations. And I want you to think about how you can rise to above the challenges and maintain resilience and still achieve the goals that you've set out for yourself and your family. And so on that note, that's enough about us. You probably want to think about some of the tricks and tips that can help you guys. So let's start thinking about your future. Our first lesson is about investment decisions. And so it's important to consider how we spend, save, and invest our money, and how that coordinates with our long-term goals. Some purchases, like that Starbucks coffee that I absolutely had to buy today and is now at like $10 a cup, may be gratifying immediately, but it's not going to help me in my long-term goals. Very similarly, as the graph shows, we could compare a purchase of a vehicle. So let's use a $34,000 car. For reference, the S&P 500 earned an average rate of return of 9.8 annually over the 90 years between 1927 and 2017. This is actually up to about 10.7% in the last 30 years as of February 25th. That does not account for what we've seen in the markets over the last couple of weeks. Cars, on the other hand, depreciate at a rate of 20% for the first year and then 10% in every subsequent year. Let's get that right. And it doesn't account for your insurance and maintenance. And so the same logic will prevail when we're thinking about our pair of shoes or that vacation that we really want to take. Both of those purchases have their benefits, but they're not going to sustain our livelihood. And I'm definitely not telling you that you shouldn't have the pair of shoes or to take the vacation, because those things are really important. But when we spend our cash, it's important to consider if it's worth investing for. There's a big difference between what we want and what we need. And we need to make sure that those cars that we're purchasing are relevant and appropriate for our life stage, just like everything else that we do. And so when you're thinking about your choices, what I would encourage you to do is, before you decide on whether you're going to make a short-term purchase, define what you want over the long term. Write it down. Pull a pen and paper. When do you want to retire? How much do you think you need? And that could be a big question mark at the beginning of your career. Are there things that are going to come up in the next 5, 10, 15 years? Home ownership, additional upgrades to your tuition. Are there things like traveling back home to see your family that's really important and relevant to you? Write those down and create a number that's associated with them. And then we can work backwards. And so we can figure out, how much do we need to save in order to get to that goal in the next 5 years and 10 years? And then set up a saving strategy. And if you can set up that saving strategy and be able to buy those brand new shoes and be able to go on that vacation, have at her. It's perfect. But if you can't, then what we need to do is look back on what are our priorities. And do we extend those goals out longer because we absolutely need those things today? Or do we maybe decide not to purchase them now and wait until we can save that up down the road? Now I'm pressing the button to go to the next slide, and it's clearly not working. So give me 1 second as I jump over to the next. The bottom line is that when you make your purchases, you've got to consider those long-term and short-term goals. Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about our raises, because there's one way to save when we put money into our investments. But the other thing that's going to happen over our career is we're going to receive some raises over time. And when we get our raise, it is super tempting to splurge and buy that pair of shoes that we really wanted and we held off because we decided to save for our future. And you may not even realize that you're actually spending more. So it's important to have a plan in place when we consider our raises over time. In fact, 40% of women state that not saving enough was one of their biggest regrets when they look back on their lives. And so if we can avoid that and set you up for success, I think that's a really good thing. And one of the things we want to be mindful of is elite lifestyle creep. And this is a phenomenon that refers to our standard of living increasing alongside our salary, meaning that what you're going to require for spending and for saving for retirement is also going to increase over time. So here's some strategies. Now, these strategies by no means negate the ability or the need to create a financial plan. But if you're not working with somebody right now and you haven't found the right advisor that's going to help build your financial plan over time, these are some really easy implementable strategies that you can use on the next raise that you get. So the first one, spend twice your years to retirement. What does that actually mean? Okay, so if, let's say, you're 10 years away from retirement and you get a raise, and let's say that raise is $100 per paycheck, you should be spending 20% of it and saving 80%. So $20 goes into your budget to enjoy that Starbucks cup of coffee because you need it. 80% goes over to your savings. If you're 30 years away from retirement, well, that means that 60% of your money, of your raise, can go towards your daily life. So $60. And 40% or $40 would go towards your savings. Another strategy that you could think about is save your age. So if you're 50 years old, save 50% of your raise. If you're 30 years old, save 30% of your age. Or a very baseline that's going to be something you can implement throughout your life is save 33% of your raise. So you get that $100 raise, $33 goes over to your savings, $67 goes into your spending. These rules are really helpful, and they can help set up a strategy that gets you into that savings habit. However, they do differ in efficacy depending on what age you are when you start implementing them. And you can see that by this graph over here. Spend twice your years to retirement tends to always get you there. But the other two fall short if you start it later on in life. So again, these are tools that we can use to think about things that you can implement for savings. But more importantly, it's about looking at your own income, looking at your own goals, having a financial plan, and then making sure those saving strategies are going to help you out over the long term. At the end of the day, make sure you take care of your future self. We know we need to take care of our current self, but our future itself is just as important. And when we're thinking about saving for our future, there are things that we need to consider as well when it comes to planning for an emergency. The reality is things are going to show up throughout our life. There are going to be speed bumps, whether it's a job loss like Tracy mentioned, or a medical emergency, or a home repair, or the vehicle breaks down, or you have to fly home because your parents are sick. All of these things will show up or may show up at some point in your life. And if we're prepared for them, it is a much better strategy than going into debt in order to combat that current experience. So what's our rule of thumb? Now, typically you're going to see online that you need to aim to have at least 6 months of your earnings in your emergency fund at every given time. And that's a sort of kind of, and I kind of go like this. If your net income into your bank account is $2,000 a month and you spend every single penny and don't save any of it, you probably need $6,000 to $12,000 saved. If you make $2,000 a month, but $1,000 goes into your savings, then you probably actually only need $3,000 to $6,000 saved in your emergency fund. And that's going to cover your short-term expenses while you go through any of those unexpected job loss or medical emergency or taking some time off work for a very short time. But here's where it gets tricky. If you make $2,000 per month, but you spend $2,500 a month, so you're going into debt every month, you actually need about $7,500 to $15,000 saved in order to cover those short-term expenses. And I know you're probably saying, holy Dinah, Danica, that is a really big number when we think about saving for emergencies, paying down our debts, currently living in our general life, because that's expensive, is particularly with tariffs and higher increased inflation. And then we still need to save for retirement too. It's making sure you have a plan. We don't need to save or do everything all at once, but understanding how we can make incremental changes throughout time is really important. And so because debt is a real thing, we need to talk a bit about that too. Because handling debt responsibly is really important. And the reality is that many Canadians don't pay off their credit card every month. And I work for a bank and we charge really big money. 20%, maybe more, goes over to your bank if you don't pay off that credit card every month. And I might like my employer, but I don't want you to pay my employer that much. And so there's some really important things that we need to think about when we think about debt. The unfortunate reality about Canadians is that we have about $1.71 in debt for every $1 of disposable income. And unfortunately, our average credit card balance is about $4,500. And they're not getting paid off every month. As you can see in the chart on the right, putting less money towards paying off your balances extends the time frame and the amount of interest that you're ultimately going to pay. So how much do you pay off? You've got to set a goal for yourself. Do you want, and this can go towards your credit cards, this can go towards your student loans, this can look at that line of credit that seems to be increasing over time. You need to make sure that it's reasonable and achievable. Do you want to pay it off in 5 years? How about 10 years? I'd suggest if you don't have a financial advisor that you're working with or a financial planner, just go onto a Google search. Look at a loan payment calculator. Type in the amount that you owe, your interest rate that you're paying, and how long you want to take to pay it off. It's going to calculate a monthly payment that you need to put towards your debt in order to achieve that. And then think to yourself, can you afford this? Are you still able to cover your daily expenses? And more importantly, are you still able to save for those emergencies that you know are going to show up? Because if you can't, and you're going to increase debt as soon as an emergency shows up, you're putting too much towards that credit card, or you're putting too much towards that line of credit. So you've got to go back and say, okay, this isn't achievable based on my budget. And so I need to go and extend that amortization out. Maybe instead of paying it off over 5 years, I look at 10 years and I reevaluate as those raises come in. And maybe instead of buying the Starbucks coffee, I decide to take that extra $10 when the raise comes in and throw it towards my debt. The other thing to consider is good debt versus bad debt. All debt is a decision for you to take future cash flow away from your future self because you need something in the present. And we shouldn't necessarily rely on debt. The more we do, the more we rob ourselves of our future. So how do we define good debt? My concept would be, are you investing for things that are going to appreciate over time? Are you investing in your education? Is your education going to turn around and create an increased income for you once you enter the workforce? If the answer is yes, then you're investing into your future. Are you buying a home today, and is that going to appreciate over time? The answer is yes. That would be good debt. What bad debt is it has no future benefit for you. And unfortunately, you may be paying for it for a foreseeable future. Those shoes that you really want because they just came on sale, but you don't have the money in your bank account, that's bad debt. It's going to depreciate. It's going to wear out. It's not a benefit for you to put it onto that credit card unless you can pay it off before the balance is due. Another consideration would be a vehicle. And I know this is going to be a challenging one for people. Vehicles are depreciating assets. They do not appreciate over time, except for during the COVID season. I know there was a period there where they increased because the supply was down, but typically they aren't. And yes, we need a vehicle. And is that vehicle going to be able to get you to somewhere where you're going to be able to set up your future self? So do you need the vehicle to get to school? Do you need the vehicle to get to work? Do you need the vehicle to enjoy the time with your family and friends? If the answer is yes, great. But can you reasonably pay for that with the loan payment that you're putting on, still save for emergencies, still manage your short-term income, and still save for your future? If the answer is yes, that vehicle is good debt. If the answer is no, and you're going to go into debt when the vehicle expenses come up, it is bad debt, and you need to reevaluate how much you're purchasing for that vehicle. Okay. Now, I think I'm going to have questions about this at the end of the presentation, and that's okay. We can ask questions then too. But I want you to start thinking about your current debt. And as you're thinking about it, one of the things to think about is look at your current balances and the interest rates. Ideally, you pay off your highest interest rate loans first. Okay. And while we're talking about credit cards, the reality is you guys are all U of M alumni, or you've seen me on Facebook and you've decided to join our presentation. And so there is a good chance that you have student debt. And the reality is the longer you take to pursue your career, the probability is the higher the debt that you have. Now, it's not as easy as just deciding that you're going to pay it off and having a straightforward budget that allows you to do that. Unfortunately, Student debt now contributes to 1 in 6 bankruptcies in Ontario. I don't have the stat for Manitoba, but the reality is Ontario is Canada, I think. So we're just going to run with that number. The average Canadian undergrad tuition costs about $6,800. And this is back in 2018 stats. So just think about it. It's appreciated at 3.3% since then. It's quite a bit more expensive. And the average MBA costs about $30,570. Paying off these loans, we need to make sure that as we set up a strategy for them, much like I've talked about on the credit card, is we want to have a plan in place. When do we want to pay it off? How much are we willing to put towards it? And with the strategies that we have in place, are you still going to be able to save for your future self? Are you still going to be able to enjoy the life that you have now? And can you make sure you set aside money for your emergencies? The unfortunate part is many Canadians find it really difficult to manage their debt, and student loans included. And unfortunately, millennials feel embarrassed regarding their lack of control over their current financial situation. The reality is most of us have been there at some point, and there's no reason to feel embarrassed. It's more important that we talk to somebody and we create strategy and have plans to feel like you're not overwhelmed with your debt and that you can't get through it. Ideally, there's an end in sight and we can get you there. At the end of the day, paying off your debt, it's tough. Having a financial plan, it's important. Having strategy to manage debt, savings, and living, also incredibly important. You are going to see a theme throughout this entire presentation, and that's coming back to having some type of financial plan, some type of financial strategy to make sure that you feel confident in the direction that you're going. And so as we think about a financial plan, it's important for you as an individual to be educated and be prepared. When it comes to personal finances, it's really common for women to feel less confident in their abilities than the average man. And this is actually a pretty big issue considering 90% of women will be required to make sole financial decisions throughout their lifetime. This can be because you're single. Your husband has passed away. Unfortunately, the stats say we live longer than men, and so we are likely going to have to manage the finances even if we didn't throughout our life. Maybe there's a divorce. So taking it into your own hands and understanding financial literacy is really important. But what does that even mean? In the banking industry, we throw around the word financial literacy all the time. The definition of this is the ability to understand and effectively use various financial skills, including personal financial management, budgeting, savings, investing, and debt management, to make informed decisions and achieve financial stability to you. What does that mean? That means that educational deficits are I'm totally jumping from forward here because I don't want to read your stats that are on the screen. But at the end of the day, it's really important for you to be educated and make sure that you have a good sense of decision. So how do we learn the basics? So I've already talked about it. Take control of your finances. Take a vested interest. Ask questions. If you're not the person who manages your finances, ask your partner about them. In my household, I'm a type A personality. I love spreadsheets. I have them all over. I break down my credit card statement. I summarize all of the totals. I present this to my husband on a monthly basis, telling him where he spent his money and how much he spent and why he shouldn't spend it. And then I have a breakdown of all of our savings. Now, I recognize that I make these decisions and I set up strategies. And if something happened to me, he is going to be in hot water understanding how I run the house. And so every now and again, I'll sit down with him and it's a little bit painful. And he'll look at all of my spreadsheets and he's going, Danica, I don't understand anything. I don't get it. But we still have the conversation and we keep circling back to it to make sure that he understands what we're doing, why we're doing it, and if something happened to me, where he can find that information so that he can move forward. So again, if you're not the person who's managing the finances, be inquisitive, ask questions, understand, get curious, because if you don't, there will be a time where you feel very overwhelmed in this in the future. If you don't have a partner, and you still don't feel like you've got a good sense of your control on your finances, talk to your advisor. Ask questions, understand how things work, ask them why they're doing things the way that they're doing or what you can do differently. Take some time and look at your spending habits. Use an app, track where your money goes, understand how much is discretionary versus fixed expenses. Listen to some podcasts on financial education. Take a workshop, understand the basics, read a book, use the web. TD, among many other financial institutions, have different videos that you can look at to gain knowledge and understand how different accounts and different debt tools work for you. We're going to have a list at the end of this presentation, and while we're going through questions, you're going to be able to look at it. And so if these things are relevant to you and you feel like they're going to be helpful, jot them down, because at the end of the day, nobody should be as interested in your financial circumstances as you. Okay. Feel like I might be getting a little bit excited here. So let's turn the topic a little bit away from financial literacy and talk a little bit about career breaks. And so the reality is that many of us at some point in time are going to be out of the labor market. And we typically think about this as child rearing, a year gap for taking care of our babies at home. But it might also be something different. It might be taking time off to take care of an aging parent or a sick partner. It might be taking time away to take care of yourself and your mental health. The decision to withdraw from the labor market is not a straightforward one. There's many costs involved, both implicit and explicit, that accompany a career break. And I want you to understand them a little bit. And before I talk this through, and I'm going to use the motherhood gap as an example, but really when you think about it, it's not the motherhood gap, it's the absence gap. It's taking time away from work, and typically a 1-year period at a time. And I want to emphasize that a career break to spend time with family and the people that you love is incredibly important. And by no means am I suggesting that you don't do it. What I am suggesting that you do is you fully understand the ramifications of this decision before you do it, and have a plan in place to alleviate the surprises so that you can take care of the people that matter most to you. So the reality is, generally speaking, career breaks generate a persistent 3% wage penalty per year of absence. And many decide not to go back to work after you've had your first baby purely because of the childcare costs being so expensive. And so they essentially directly relate to the loss of annual salary. But this is not necessarily going to cancel out the opportunity costs. Women can incur less financial penalty from taking a break by having a contingency plan. It's actually shown that more experienced women in their roles, the more experience that women have in their roles before they take a break, can actually mitigate that gap. In addition to this, people who go back to the same employer after that gap suffer less in terms of that gap. These are elements that can be planned out, and to some extent, have a conversation about it before you leave. So for instance, if you know you want to take time away from work, establish your career goals before you do. Make sure you talk to your boss. Explain what it is that you want to achieve and when you want to come back. Maintain your connections with your colleagues and people in your industry. The more that you plan for it, the less that this gap is going to occur. And when you look at this graph on the right-hand side, you see two colors. You see the blue and you see the green. When we talk about the motherhood gap, and again, this is just a year gap away from work, what this shows is that if you take 1 year away from work, yes, you're going to have an explained portion, which is going to be the loss of your wages and the lack of increase from a raise that you're going to see as a result of that year away. The blue, however, is unexplained portion. And this is more attributed to the experience that you gain in your role, the ability over time to move through it, the knowledge that you lose being away from work. If you take 1 year away, come back, and then take another year away, the wage gap is the same, but the unexplained portion actually increases the more times that you take time away from work. And that's purely from a career progression perspective. So when we think about a career break, some things to think about: depreciation of your skill set. We know how fast technology is moving these days, and it can be really difficult to stay up to date when you're outside of the workforce. If your intention is to come back in, maintain your acumen, make sure that you're educated, keep up to date with the things that are changing within your career perspective so that you can come in and be up on things. Re-entry timeline. Have a plan if you want to return. Articulate this. I'm going to speak to my own experience. When I had my first baby, I knew that I wanted to go from being a personal banker to a senior personal banker. And I also knew that I wanted a raise every year as I went on with my career. Unfortunately, when I was going to go on my first mat leave, my boss sat me down and said, Danica, we've got so much money that we have to disperse to everybody who's working, and you're going to be off for a year. So it doesn't make sense for us to give that wage to you, that raise to you. So we're not going to do it. And I said, that's fine. But my expectation is that when I come back after a year away, that I receive that raise once I come back in. Setting clear expectations is important. When I went for my second mat leave, I wanted to come back in as a senior personal banker. And so the conversation was had with my manager at the time saying, hey, I'm leaving. Here's what I'd like. I would love to take my skills to the next level and become a senior financial or a senior personal banker at the time when I come back from my mat leave. What do I need to do while I'm gone in order to achieve this goal? There was clear expectations set. There was clear expectations of when I re-entered. And as a result, I was able to move through my career progression and into that new role within 3 months of returning back to work. Loss of salary, we talked about this. This is just the direct loss of annual income. You take a year off, you were making 60,000. Guess what? You're not making 60,000. If you receive EI, you're getting some money, but probably not nearly as much as you anticipated. So having time away is going to have a direct relation to that. Number of absences. This is not the number of days you stay away from work because your children are sick. This is the number of years that you choose to take away from work, that motherhood gap. Again, I want to specify that taking time away from work is important. And if it's right for you and your family, make sure that you do it. But have a plan in place before you do. It'll set you up for success. It'll limit your frustrations and make sure you get where you want to be. Okay, so it is 7:42, and I recognize that we still have 3 more lessons to go through, and I think we can manage it, but we will go over like Tracy mentioned. So your next lesson is rethinking guilt. Unfortunately, women disproportionately reference the feeling of guilt or shame comparative to our male counterparts, especially as it relates to being a working parent. We're hardwired as women to examine our professional decisions through the lens of giving something up. Most commonly, that's time spent with our children. Men, on the other hand, are not faced with that same trade-off. If you think about the last time that you missed the dinner table or weren't there to put your children to bed, that's the woman guilt kicking in. And a lot of the time, men don't have that same feeling of guilt.
Danica, I just wanted to actually just on the mom guilt, if I can just share a very brief comment, because others may feel the same way. Won't take much time, but I know that when I returned back to work after my first maternity leave, it was the hardest 4 to 6 weeks of my life. It was awful. The daycare had to. I was the lucky one on drop off. And then my husband got to pick up. And so every single day for 4 to 6 weeks, they had to pry my son off of me, pull him away, grab him off my leg. He was crying. I was crying. I cried every single day to work, and I felt awful. And I was really thinking, am I making the right decision? Right. And I'd always have to convince myself that I was making the right decision for our family. But that guilt took a long time for me I've never gotten rid of the guilt. It just subsided a bit. And then with my second maternity, I just felt more prepared. But it was definitely something it was a decision I was making to go back to work, and I had to live with the guilt, but it was very challenging. So just wanted to share that.
No, thanks, Tracy. That's relevant and real.
like to share something about myself. It's very kind of the opposite, right? Because I was I worked part-time, and so I was home a lot with my daughter, right? What the guilt I felt, and it wasn't really a guilt I felt, it was the people around me constantly asking me, when are you going to go back full time? When are you going to go back full time? And that made me feel guilty. It's like, why do I need to go full time, right? But then I had to go back and step back and realize, why was I working? Get back to the fundamentals again, say, what was the reason why I was staying home part-time, right? It fit within my family, right? Our lifestyle. And I knew I was giving up, something, but it worked for us for now. So it was an opposite. It was when you plan to go back to work, that kind of guilt, right?
Yes.
Instead of being at home. So, you know what? I think the best thing is we have to realize what works best for our family and take away that noise that's around us, and don't look at that. We can't compare ourselves with another family. You look at your family, and that, look again, planning, strategy, and it fits within what you decided. Great.
Yeah, I think that's relevant. I think, it kind of speaks to this, focus on what's right for you, focus on long-term benefits, and make sure that you're pursuing the things that you would like to pursue. Because at the end of the day, if you feel fulfilled, then you're going to be more fulfilled for your family, and you're going to feel like it's the right decisions overall. Be kind to yourself, and make sure that you prioritize the things that matter most to you and not the things that matter most to others. And as we're thinking about guilt, the other thing that we need to think about is confidence. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, women feel not nearly as confident in their financial decision making as our counterparts do. And so men are more likely to attribute their successes to innate qualities, whereas women will believe that they're lucky or have received help along the way. Men find it easier to assert their wants, needs, and opinions. They're more predisposed to asking for what they want and not feeling ashamed about it. But it's important for us not to belittle ourselves and be harmful about our notions of incapability. We're strong, we're confident, we're able. We can actualize those ideas and goals that we have. And so this comes down to defining what matters most to you and asking the questions that are relevant. I go back to those raise conversations. I go back to a job negotiation. When we look at job negotiations, let's say you did an interview and that organization is presenting you with an offer letter. Typically, what women will do is they will see that offer and they'll say, okay, that looks good. It wasn't quite what I expected, but I'll take it. It's a job. I'm going to work. It feels good. The male counterpart typically looks at that, says, okay, I'll think about it, goes back, does some research, writes a document, looks at what other people are getting paid within the industry, and comes back and says, you know what? I think I deserve more. I think I should get a little bit more. And so when you're thinking about yourself, not only is there importance on building your financial literacy and confidence, but there's also being confident on what is it that you want and are you getting what you want over time. The best way to do this is to write down what it is that you desire, what you think is relevant and appropriate for you, and then make sure that you hit and achieve it. But beware of where you put your own personal roadblocks in the way. Okay, we've talked a lot about building and saving for the future, making good investment decisions. We've talked about paying down debt and how to manage that responsibly. We've talked about making sure that you're kind to yourself and that you're taking your ownership of your financial literacy into your own hands and making sure that you're on the path that's right for you. But there's another element that is really important, and that's going to be our lesson 10, which is about leaving a legacy. Most women don't think about their legacy, whether that's due to day-to-day stresses or simply because they haven't been asked about it. This is a reality. In fact, women are less likely to have a will. About 54% of us don't, versus 47% of men. And this is an area where Helen spends a lot of time of her life. And so, Helen, I would like you to take an opportunity to talk a little bit about setting up particular documents and the impacts of if we don't have those things in place.
Yes, these stats are quite alarming. It's almost like 1 in every 2 people do not have a plan. We talked about setting that plan from, when we came out of university till we retire, but no one thinks about the plan for after the fact, right? And maybe that's why a lot of people don't talk about it, because either, oh no, we're too young, or it's too morbid, or someone's got to take care of it. Don't worry about that. You've worked hard your whole life trying to build this worth, right? And now you're just gonna kind of almost like toss a coin, says, oh, see what happens, right? So we definitely don't want to do that, right? It's very important that you do have a plan set up, not just when you pass away, but also when you're still alive, but you're not able to look after your affairs, right? And why we always say is that, for especially right now, because we are talking about women finances, why is it especially essential for women? Right? We do have unique circumstances, right? Women are usually primary caregivers. They usually are the ones who look after their elderly parents as well. More and more women now are having their own companies, right? As well, again, I think Danica said about that, we live longer, right? Most women will outlive. So they're going to have um, uh, a transfer of wealth as well. They've grown their wealth. So why is it very important, right? And we need to make sure that they're protected while they're alive, as well as their wishes are looked after when they pass away. So when we say that, right, leaving legacy is not just about a will. And a lot of people think about estate planning as just a will, right? And that's it. No, it's not, right? What if you can't look after your affairs while you're alive? Perhaps a mental incapacity, perhaps a stroke, something, right? Where you can't look after that. Well, guess what? Your life still goes on. You still have debt. You still have kids perhaps to look after, right? So you want to make sure that you have that plan. Again, we hear about plan, you hear about that strategy word again, but it's exactly what you're doing. You want to make sure that things are looked after when you're not able to, right? And then as well, when you pass away, your will come into place. So leaving a legacy, estate planning, just don't think about death. It's also before that. So when we take a look at that, there's usually 3 documents I always say everyone should have, right? The first one is what we call the healthcare directive. People get confused a lot of times when they hear power of attorney, right? A power of attorney is more for your finances, your property, helping you sell the house, making decisions on your investments. But a healthcare directive is for someone you appoint to look after your wishes for your health, right? Do you want to be resuscitated, right? How do you want to prolong if you want to prolong? So you definitely want to pick someone that has your wishes and able to follow up with your wishes, right? So that's a healthcare directive. The other document that everybody also should have is that power of attorney, right? We talk about, if for someone who has a business and all of a sudden they are for some reason not able to manage their affairs anymore, who's going to run that business? Right. Again, even if you don't have a business or you're retired right now, who's going to do your income tax returns, right? Who's going to make sure that all your bills are paid? Who's going to look after your investments, right? All those things are still have to be taken a look after, even if you're not able to. Again, you want to make sure that you appoint someone who knows about perhaps accounting, who understands about finances, as well as who's able to do it, right? Who's able to step into your shoe. And that's exactly what kind of power attorney is. You're stepping in that person's shoe, right? And finally, we talk about the will, right? And why is it important? So once someone passes away, that power attorney stops. And then what happens is your will comes into place, right? And what happens if you don't have a will? Well, what happens when you don't have a will is called intestacy. And they're actually, every province has their own set of rules of how that money will, your estate will get dispersed, right? Most of the time it's going to go to your partner, your family members, but what if you don't have? What if you were single and you may have a long lost cousin that you've never met in your life who's going to get your estate? While, however, you wish perhaps your friend or even a charity, they're not going to be able to follow your wishes, right? If it's not documented. So having a will is very important. Having a will is also that planning for after the fact, right? Is when we're taking a look is, well, what if I had young children? Who do I want to name as the guardian to look after those children, right? Who do I want to look after perhaps the trust that we're going to give to those children to look at so we could make sure that their lifestyle or their well-being, their education is looked after. So those are things that we take a look at. In a way, it's kind of like, I don't want to say dictating from the grave, but in a way you are putting that plan of what you wish, right? And there's many reasons, and everybody is different. So there's no right or wrong, but having that will, I think is really, really important, right? Taking a look at the will and making sure that you review it every 3 to 5 years, just like you did a financial plan. Circumstances change. Perhaps you got remarried, you got divorced, you sold a business, new grandchildren came, right? So those things you always want to kind of relook at every 3 to 5 years, right? And again, your executor. What if, as we get older, our executor a lot of times when we're younger, we choose our parents, right? Our parents are getting older. So as we get older, they're even getting more older, right? So we want to make sure we review that will, and it's very, very important, right? And I think having that will is, again, that plan, right, for the after fact, right? And why is this all important? Again, we talked about taking charge of your life, your legacy, the education, or just understanding your your finances. And I think leaving a legacy is kind of the same thing, right? You've built it. Now, hopefully there's a plan that you can help you distribute it, right, according to your wishes. So making sure that you have a will or all these 3 documents are very, very important.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Helen. I can't stress this one enough, regardless of your age. If you have assets, you own home, you have investments, making sure that these pieces are in place are so critically important. And I could share example after example of different times where clients have encouraged them to do this and they haven't. And the stress and the pain points and the additional costs that are associated with the family when a power of attorney isn't in place and we want to sell a house, or when a will isn't in place and they're sole owned investments. If you have not looked at your power of attorney or your will recently, I encourage you to look at it. And if you don't have one and you're starting to accumulate assets, even if you're in your 20s or 30s, I encourage you to have a conversation about this and get these documents in place. I cannot stress the importance of it more than what I'm saying right now and having those. And so, on that note, as we look at those 10 lessons, I hope what you get from this is that having a wealth plan for yourself is really important. And that wealth plan considers thinking about your future, how you're going to manage your debt, how you own your own education when it comes to your personal finances, but at the same time, giving yourself grace and being kind for where you are and allowing yourself to unfold. When we talk about wealth plan, that word wealth plan can feel very overwhelming, but it doesn't need to be. It can be as simple or as complex as you are within your life stage. The important piece is a good wealth plan documents your goals for the future. That could be you simply writing on a piece of paper when you want to achieve something. So who, what, when, where, why. When do you want to get it done? How much is it going to cost? Why are you doing it? What is your purpose? How are you going to get there? Make sure you're monitoring and following up. So when we create a plan, it is not a one and done. It is a roadmap that creates a sense of direction to give you a surety that you're on the right path. But the reality is that life throws us curveballs more often than we would anticipate. And so every time it does, we want to come back to our plans and look at them. Are they relevant? Do they make sense? Do we need to adjust this over time because things have changed? The more you have a sense of understanding of where you are and where you're going, the more confident you're going to be, the more reassured you're going to be on setting yourself up for success both today and in the future. Okay, it is like 7:59, you guys. We are done this presentation. Thank you so much for staying along with me. I truly appreciate it. If you guys have questions, make sure you ask them. We are here to engage and continue on with this conversation. If something that you had and wanted to come to this presentation for wasn't asked, this is the time to ask. I'm going to move the slide over to a financial literacy resource side, and that's not because the questions are done, but it's so that it's up there while we're having this conversation. So if you want to take control of your finances and these things would be helpful, hey, use them. It's not an exhaustive list, but it's here for you guys. And on that note, I'm going to switch it over to Tracy, and she's going to moderate some of our questions.
Super. Thank you, Danica. So yes, there's lots of takeaways here. So that was something that she and I had talked about in terms of other financial literacy resources. So please look at all of them. There's some great stuff here. And I know that one big takeaway for me is increasing my financial literacy. So I definitely will be doing some of this. So Danica and Helen, we have 5 questions that have come through from beginning to the end of the presentation. So I'm just going to go in order. So the first one is, when you spoke about the emergency fund earlier on in the presentation, it was recommendations for where to put emergency fund. Is it in savings, or is there an account with growth with a decent rate of return that still leaves funds accessible for emergencies?
Yeah, so this depends on where you're at in your emergency savings journey. So if we are in a spot where you are just starting to build that savings, my advice is don't worry about the return. Make sure that you're setting aside the money. So when I think about buckets, when I think where we put our money, there's our short-term bucket where we are going to use this money within a 1-year period. There's our 1 to 3 year bucket. There's our 4 to 9 year bucket. And then there's our 10-year or more bucket. When we're establishing our emergency savings, we're in the 1 year or less bucket. And so that bucket is cash or cash equivalent savings account. You plop it in, don't focus on the interest rate. We want to make sure this money is accessible and ready and available for you when you need it. If we've built it, and now it's sitting at, $5,000, $6,000, $7,000, and you're going, okay, this is a pretty significant balance and I want to start earning. Now we start thinking about our 1 to 3 year bucket. And that bucket is going to be more like your tax-free savings. If it's not being used for retirement already, it's going to be GICs, investment savings accounts. We still want it liquid. We still want it secure, but we want to start earning some interest. And if we've filled that bucket up, now we jump to our 4 to 9 year bucket where we start focusing on growth, bonds, equities, those types of pieces. Hopefully that answers your question.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay. Next question is about credit cards. So
yeah.
How can you negotiate a lower interest rate on a credit card or line of credit with a bank?
Yeah, so it's really tough. A lot of debt insolvency places will say, hey, you can negotiate your interest rates. You really can't. If you're not in a position where you're looking at a consumer proposal, where you have debt that's wrapped up and you're not making payments on it, they're pretty standard. When we look at financial institutions in terms of their interest rates, credit cards are flat. It doesn't matter whether you work for the bank or not, you're getting the same interest rate on that card. There are some lower rate interest rate cards that you could look at. So maybe you have one at 21% and your bank offers a prime plus percentage, and that's going to be at a 12%. You could look at talking to them and applying for that other one, but I would caution you. A credit card is designed to pay off on a monthly basis. And if we're not paying that credit card off by the due date, you're paying too much in interest. So let's talk about lines of credit. Lines of credit are typically prime plus a percentage. And the plus percentage is based on your credit score. So do you have a great credit score? You're going to get priced lower. If you have not such a great credit score, you're going to get priced higher. If you go with a credit line versus a loan, you're going to have a higher interest rate because there's more risk to the bank. Now, if you want to pay that debt off and you feel like you can commit to some fixed payments, you could go with a fixed loan, and that's going to have a lower interest rate than your credit line. So negotiating the rate is really about how we manage your funds and making sure you make your payments versus going in and saying, hey, I want a softer rate on this. A lot of the time that doesn't happen. But let's look at the product that you have and make sure the product is reasonable and appropriate. Does that make sense?
Yep, yeah. Great. Thank you. Okay. Next question. Do you have any lessons for those who are participating that are self-employed or independent contractors? Therefore, they have a less reliable income month to month.
Yeah, for sure. So my advice is connect with your financial planner and have a conversation. You do have variable income. And so when we think about a risk model, you're taking on a higher risk for that income to hopefully set yourself up for a better future success. When you're taking on higher risk, having a higher contingency plan is really important. So somebody who has more risk in the variability of their income, we should have more cash on hand than somebody who has an employed contract that, it's a permanent T4 position. They're readily, steadily available for that income stream. So when you think about self-employed, independent contractor, being more conservative with your cash is really important. Build that base, and then from there, go on and start building that long term. Have a conversation with a professional. Make sure you're setting yourself up for success. What I do see a lot of the time is, as a self-employed individual, you're in that headspace that you're an independent contractor. So you need to make sure you've got lots of cash on hand just in case that next contract or that next sale doesn't go through. But all of a sudden, you've got way too much money sitting in cash and your money isn't working for you. So it can work to your disadvantage too, where you're not allowing your money to work for you, compound and grow over time. Connect with somebody, have a conversation, make sure we've got the right strategy in place.
Okay, thank you. Okay, next question. Would you suggest taking money out of investments or take out a line of credit for a larger purchase, like a home renovation, a home repair, like a new roof or a new vehicle?
Yeah, great question. So this is it depends. I can't really answer that question without understanding your entire financial picture. And the reason that I say that is that there is a number of factors. What type of investment are we taking out of? Is it an RSP where we take money out and you're going to have income that's added onto your income tax for the year and you're taxed at a pretty high tax rate? Is it coming out of a TFSA or a non-registered investment? How is it invested? Is it invested with an average rate of return of 3% or 10%? Because that's going to make that decision on whether we're using credit or investments something that's important. The other thing to think about is, if we take that money out of the investment now, is that going to allow you to support your retirement goals or the other things that are coming up that money was set aside for? If the answer is yes, and you can still do those things, it's probably better not to use the debt. If the answer is no, then we need to think about it a little bit more. The other piece is, on a credit line or a loan, you're going to have an interest payment. You're going to have a debt repayment schedule. So does that fit within your current lifestyle and your current spending habits? I don't know. So it comes down to looking at your financial picture and understanding where you are, where you want to be, and which vehicle is the right one for you. I will tell clients to do either. It really depends on their overall financial circumstances and what's going to set them up in the best way for their long-term strategy.
Okay, great. Okay, Helen, we've got a few questions on wills. Okay, first one. What are common roadblocks for women in creating a will, and any suggestions, or do you have any suggestions for addressing them?
I think the most important thing that we see is that not being involved in the finances from the beginning, not understanding what they have, right? I think that's really hard. Also, we've seen a lot where spouses, couples open up a corporation, spouse is 100%, like, or maybe 50% shareholder, right? But they don't understand what's going on. They don't know what's going on. And so how do you plan for something when you don't know that what you have, right? And that is not just for, well, I shouldn't say that, because as we see it, it is, right? More women, it's getting better. But I think when we're looking at the past, looking at the elderly clients that are 70s, 80s right now, right, is a lot of them aren't involved in their finances. They don't know what's going on. So that is a roadblock. And I think that's where everyone needs to get involved in understanding is what they have, what are their assets, what is the tax implications going to be? All those information, having a good estate lawyer will look at the whole plan and probably help you out to write it. So there is no any specific, right? But again, having a good lawyer, they will help you with this plan.
I think something else too to think about when I think about women in roadblocks is the fear of death and the fear of mortality. And the other piece to think about is, well, my husband doesn't want to do it. I have a lot of clients where their husband just doesn't want to think about death. And I have the other opposite where the wife doesn't want to think about death, but the husband wants to plan. A will and a power of attorney document is an independent document that is for you. It's not for you and your spouse. And so, if you've got a spouse that says, like, I don't want to think about it, I don't want to deal with it, it ain't happening, you can still write a will. You can still do a power of attorney. What you're doing is setting up your family if you passed away. And unfortunately, if the other partner passes away who didn't write the will, they're leaving a little bit of a mess for you, but you're doing your part. And so I think that is one hurdle that we've seen and I see in my practice a lot, is that one partner just doesn't want to do it. Guess what? You can still do it.
Okay, good advice. So what you both answered may address the next question, which is how do you set up a will and power of attorney? Now, Helen, you were talking about get a really good lawyer for that. I don't know if that would be your same advice in terms of approaching a will and power of attorney.
Exactly. Yeah. That's exactly what you want to do is have a good lawyer who understands about estate planning, right? Because they're going to ask all the questions just like a doctor does, right? When you come in, a doctor's not going to say, oh, you have a sore arm. This is your remedy, right? They're going to ask you your whole health questions. Same thing when you have a good estate lawyer, they'll do the same thing, right? So definitely these are legal documents. So they need to be written up by a professional.
Yeah. And I think too, when you think about that, a lot of people will go, well, I can do a will kit online. It's cheaper. And so, when we think about it, so if you had nothing and you're not going to go to a lawyer, sure, write up a holographic will. Is it going to be the best? Absolutely not. And is there pitfalls that you're probably putting in there that are going to impact your family? Probably. But if you hand wrote a will versus having nothing, that's going to be better. If you did a will kit online versus meeting with a lawyer, well, the lawyer is still going to be more detail oriented and specific to your circumstances. But if you had to choose between having nothing and using a will kit, use a will kit if you're not willing to go see the lawyer. But at the end of the day, the lawyer is going to consider tax implications of structures. They're going to talk about your relationship. Does it make sense to have trust structures for children? Who's the right person? Are the verbiage in there going to trip somebody up, or is it going to be right to exactly what it is that you want? Because verbiage is really important. And the other thing that people think about is they go, well, don't worry, Danique, I've got a will, so I don't need a power of attorney. No, you do. And really important, that power of attorney absolutely needs to be done up by a lawyer. Like, there's no will kits for powers of attorney. There's no handwritten power of attorney that you can put on a piece of paper and it's going to be accepted. A power of attorney needs to be done by a lawyer, and it should be done by a lawyer who does wills and estates. It shouldn't be done by somebody who's a real estate lawyer or a corporate lawyer, because everybody has their own knowledge and you need the person who has the knowledge in that area.
So speaking of this, there's a question. Just can you rephrase what are the names of the documents that they need, right? Because they're wanting to know about financial decisions, being taken care of in case you're ill, taking care of minors, and managing assets. If you could just rephrase what those documents are again.
So the first one's called a healthcare directive, right? So that one, it could be a little bit, sometimes you hear living will too. That is the person that you're going to nominate to look after your wishes for your medical health, right? Your medical, your body, those kind of decisions, right? The power of attorney appoints someone to look after your personal finances, your investments, your house, anything that you would be doing, speaking with CRA, right? Anything like that. And then the last one is the will, right? So the will is going to look after your wishes once you pass away. Now, the only thing is there isn't anything that in the sense if you were ill, to look after your minor children, right? So that one you probably would have to, because if the guardian, the parent, right, the one who is, I guess, is if there's two parent, the other parent should be the one who's legally also to make that decision. But if they're not able to and there's nobody else around, then someone has to go to the courts and apply to be looking after these children, right? And if there is nobody and nobody's able to, and that person, if you are sick and you're not able to look after the children, unfortunately, the public garden trustee may come involved, right? So yes, have that plan, talk to your friends, your neighbors, your family, right? And say that if something ever happens, especially if you're the primary caregiver and there is no other partner and you need help, talk to your friends right now, talk to the family members that if I am sick right now, you need to be here. You need to be here for my children. This is what you need, right? Unfortunately, there is no document for that, right? Because when a child, anybody, when a child is young, it's usually the parents who make their decisions, and that's it. And then it has to go to the courts, right? So,
Yeah.
mhm.
And I think the other thing to be really cognizant of is like in your will, if you've got minor children, you can specify who's going to be your trustee to manage those assets that you have to support them throughout their life. You can also state in there who you would like as a guardian to provide your recommendations. But at the end of the day, if both you and your partner or the other, if you don't have a partner, whoever's your children's biological parents or adopted parents, whatever, if both of you are passed, then the court has the final decision around who's going to be the guardian for your children. They're going to make the decision based on capability. They're going to take into account what you've documented in your will based on your decision. However, they may not actually enact them if they feel like it's not right for your children. I'm going to give you a really good example. My mom, her mom passed away when she was 13 years old. And yes, okay, you can say that's 50 years ago, but the example is still relevant in today's circumstances. Her dad was alive and he wasn't fit to raise her. And so the courts took her away, social services took her away and put her in with her family. And so her family was here in Manitoba. They were her mom's siblings. However, the life that she led versus the life that these family members led were very, very different. And so after a couple of months, the social services decided that this wasn't right for her. Yes, it was family members. However, they had very different values, very different norms, and they put her into the foster care system. And she was really sad and hurt through that through her entire life. But the reality is had she been with the family members, it wouldn't be right. And so even though her mom wanted them to go there, they still didn't get there because it was assessed as not being appropriate. So you put it in your will, but at the end of the day, if everybody who takes care of those children, the primary and secondary caregivers, are deceased, the court and the social services is going to decide.
Okay, so we still have lots of questions. Maybe we'll get through some of them. So now we've got a bunch of questions on retirement. So one of them is about retirement investing. So this person is currently retired and not sure where they can invest their money so they can get some sort of pay every month. Thoughts?
Yeah. So talk to your financial planner. I think that's going to be like my level advice. However, when you think about cash, it depends on how much money you want or have that you are setting aside for this income stream. And where is it right now? Is it in a RSP or a RIF? Is it in a tax-free savings account? Is it in a bank account? Is it in a non-registered investment account? So that's the first piece we have to understand. Where's this money and how are we working with it? The next thing that we need to think about is how much do you want on a monthly basis? Is it $100 a month to supplement your income? Is it $1,500 a month? And how long do we want this money to last? So those questions need to be answered. And then from there, we start looking at an investment strategy. I am a huge believer in a bucketing strategy, which ultimately says money that we're going to use in 1 to 3 years is cash or cash equivalents to make sure that we're securing that principal for you and we're not reducing the longevity of your investments in a down market. So we keep that cash and we create a payment schedule where it just comes in and pays your bank account. But the money that's going to support you for that 4 to 9 year window in retirement, that should be in bonds or GICs or a bond equity portfolio, so that it's hopefully beating inflation. And then the money we're going to use 10 years or more, you can still take risk even though you're retired. It can still be invested in the equity market, because over a 10-year period, it's going to net a positive return, like 100% of the time, but I can't guarantee that. But at the end of the day, we create that strategy that's right for the income stream that you need. If you're somebody who's not risk adverse, you could, in theory, go with a stock that pays out a dividend, and that dividend can be your monthly income stream. It depends on what we're working with. So ideally, you define how much you want, you define how long you want your money to last, you identify where it is, and then we create a strategy from there. Connect with a financial planner so they can look at your unique circumstances.
I feel that answer probably has addressed some of the other ones, but there's a few questions here on semi-retirement and going or retiring, but working part-time, and what the financial implications are there, or are there any?
Yeah. So it depends on your age. It depends on if you've retired and started to take your retirement income streams already or not. There can be financial implications. I think at the end of the day, you want to look at your life and decide what's right for you in terms of how you spend your time and if you're having enough money to support your income. But some pitfalls or some things to think about. Once we retire, we have multiple income streams. Typically, we have the choice of taking CPP if we're over 60, taking OAS if we're over 65. We can have pension income that's going to come in from a previous employer. We're going to have RIF income from our investments. Whether or not you've chosen to take those already is going to have an implication on your tax bracket if you choose to take part-time employment. The more money you make, the more taxes you're going to pay. The other thing to think about in retirement is that you have multiple income streams that are taxed, and every source is ignorant to the other. And so what I mean by that is CPP assumes that that's your only source of income. OAS assumes that's your only source of income. So they're only taking off enough taxes based on what your income is with them. But we live in a tiered system. On the first $15,000 we make, we pay no taxes. And then it tiers up to 25%, and then it tiers up to 27, and then 33, and it continues to grow. And so what can happen is you've got all of these sources that aren't speaking to each other, and you end up with a really big tax bill at the end of the year. And that can happen when you're part-time, working part-time too. So understanding if you're going to work part-time, what are all of your income sources? What is your entire income from everything? And making sure we're deducting enough at source to make sure that you're not feeling the pain at the end of the year and feeling like, man, why did I even work part-time anyways? The other thing to think about, there's so many things. I could go on this topic for an hour, honestly. But the other thing to think about top of mind is, are you going to pay into CPP? So if you're over 65 and you're taking your CPP, you go back to work part-time, do you want to contribute in? You can if you want to. You can choose not to if you don't. If you do, you're going to get a post-retirement benefit, which is going to increase your CPP. So that's another thing to think about. Taxes is our big one. Lifestyle is another one. Understanding your income streams would be the third.
Okay, here's some quick ones. Home versus rent.
Oh gosh, that's not a quick one at all, Tracy. I'm so sorry. It depends. Look, it depends on who you are. It depends on how much money you have. It depends on if you've got a house and you want to sell it in equity in it. Do you want to do the work? Do you want to worry about fixed expenses or emergencies, the house, the roof repair versus the furnace that goes? It's not straightforward. There's a lot of clients that my advice is to rent in retirement, or even rent while you're working. And then other clients, I think it's their best interest to purchase. It really depends on your lifestyle. A lot of my clients will opt to rent for their entire life and never own a home because they like the peace of mind of a fixed payment, and they can save into their investments in a strategic way that feels right for them. Then renting is the right way. But others love the tangibility of owning a house and being able to make it their own, and they're okay with the unexpected expenses that show up. And of course, then there's the leverage strategy. If you're borrowing today at current rates and using a mortgage, there's an investment strategy there that we need to contemplate. And so how does that fit into your picture? It's not a straightforward answer. It's what matters to you, and how does it fit in your overall picture?
Okay, TFSA or keeping money in a savings account?
Oh, not a straightforward question either. Okay, here's the reality, guys. TFSA is not a savings account at all. They made the wrong wording when they called it a TFSA. It should have been like a TFIA, investment account. The benefit of a TFSA, truly, to leverage it to its full capacity, is to use that TFSA and invest into something that is going to appreciate at a rate that is pretty good. And so I'm talking mutual funds, ETFs, GICs, maybe kind of equities, bonds. Because if you put 10,000, let's say, into your TFSA, and you can compound that over, I don't know, 10 years to $15,000 or $20,000, guess what? You take that money out of the TFSA and you never pay income tax on the growth. That's the way to use a TFSA. In fact, it should be part of your retirement strategy, not your short-term strategy, because it creates flexibility in retirement. How much do you take out of your RSP versus your TFSA? I want so much money in income, but I don't want to pay taxes on it. Guess what? We can float between those two accounts. And the TFSA has an incredible estate strategy perspective. It's the only vehicle that we can transfer wealth to the next generation without income tax circumstances associated with it. So TFSA versus savings. Well, if you don't have long-term savings and you're not in a situation in your life to save for long-term savings and you want to shelter the interest that you're earning, sure, use a TFSA instead of a savings account, but really it should be long-term. And the other thing you have to be really cautious about is a savings account is designed to move money in and out, and your TFSA has a limit. You only get $7,000 per year into your TFSA. If you were 18 in 2008, I think the number was, then you have $102,000 in room. But if you turned 18 last year, you only have $14,000 in room. And so if you put 14,000 in and then you take it out this year because you needed to buy a car and then you put the money back in, you've over contributed. And CRA isn't going to catch it for 2 years, but they're going to penalize you 1% per month on that over contribution until it's done. So TFSA savings account isn't a good correlation, but it comes down to your personal circumstances and what's right for you.
Gotcha. Okay. This next question might be a bit of a doozy to answer too, but it's really interesting. So it's most financial talks or plans are geared towards women who are starting out young, lots of room to earn money. What happens when you're middle-aged and you're having to start from scratch? Advice, thoughts?
It sucks. I mean, let's be frank, nobody wants to start over, particularly in the middle of your life when you feel like you had it going. Most of the talks are going to be around setting yourself up early and making sure you have success. But that doesn't mean if you have to restart in the middle of your life that you're doomed. It means that we have to have a really clear plan. What is important to you? And how do we make sure that you're getting there? And how do you make sure that you're not feeling overwhelmed with the decisions that you have to make? My advice is sit down with somebody, have a conversation, be candid. The more your advisor knows about you and how you're feeling inside about your current circumstances, the better they're going to be able to direct you and make sure that you're setting yourself on the right footing going forward. Life happens. What we have to do is make sure that we make the best out of it and set you up in the best way. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, two last, I think these might be quicker questions. They might be for Helen. Question on, are there lower cost options for accessing lawyers for low income seniors or through community agencies? Are you aware of any lower cost lawyers?
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything, but definitely, if you belong to association or Nova Association, I was actually Googling just right now to find that answer, right? And, look for senior communities, association, definitely you can talk to them. But again, you know what? It all depends how simple your will is if there's not a lot of assets, it's perhaps maybe, one checking account, one savings account, something very, very simple. There are lawyers who don't charge $1,500, $2,000, right? Because they're not giving you the full big plan. But if it's something more simple, definitely, there are I don't want to say regular lawyers, but there are lawyers who will do it for a cheaper amount. But definitely reach out to those senior associations and ask those questions.
Okay, I know. Great. Yeah. And I'm going to just kind of add on to there really quickly. because I was conversing with a lawyer recently, and she actually does presentations for seniors' homes in Manitoba and does very much that for a very basic will to put it in place. She won't charge very much. And so, what I would suggest, and to your point, Helen, is connect with associations. I know she's connected to those. There are lawyers who do that and believe in affordable access for seniors, and that's their specialties. So I know there's some out there. Just do a little bit of poking. Worst case, if you need a number, feel free to find me on LinkedIn, and I can give you a couple contacts that you can explore.
Someone just posted age and opportunity is a good one. So look into that. Yeah, it's a good suggestion. Okay, another question, Helen, I think this is probably for you, is how important is investing in life insurance policies as part of your financial portfolio?
Oh no, that is totally a me conversation.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Unless Helen, you
want insurance at all.
Yeah. Okay. So this is, again, an it depends conversation on whether or not life insurance is really valuable. There are certain things that we think about where insurance is going to be really relevant. So early on in life, you have a lot of debt. You've bought your house, you've got student loans. It's kind of more important for you if you're starting off a family, maybe you have young children, having insurance policies. What happens if you passed away? We need to cover that debt, make sure your children are taken care of, your spouse is taken care of, we've got the income to support you. So early on in life, insurance is really, really important. Then as we go through life, it becomes not as relevant. We've paid down our debt, we've built up our savings. If something happened to us, we're probably okay. The surviving spouse is probably going to be fine. But then later on, we've accumulated all of these assets, and then there might be a big tax liability. If I've got $300,000 in an RSP and I have no spouse and I die, guess what? $300,000 is taxed in the year of my death. And that is a lot of money that I'm giving to CRA. And so an insurance policy can start becoming a tax mitigation policy. So money is left for your loved ones. Other aspects of that would be if you own corporations and other complex assets, there's more of an argument for insurance. Again, I'm going to harp on you, go back to the financial plan. When I write a financial plan, one of the things that I consider is there sufficient insurance based on the current life stage? And then we can track that out when it becomes kind of irrelevant, and then look at it from a long-term perspective. It depends on where you are, depends on your financial circumstances, but there is certainly an argument for insurance. And there's an argument for insurance from a state perspective too, when we think about charities, when we think about, again, tax mitigation, when we think about spending all of your money because you want to enjoy your life, but you also want to leave some money for your loved ones. There are reasons to have insurance, and it just depends on what's your priorities.
Okay, the last question I'm going to leave everybody with, which is a great one, is it kind of has come full circle, is you talked a lot about a financial advisor. How do you find a financial advisor, and what are some of the key questions to ask to know if you found the right one?
Yeah, great question. Look, this is your financial journey. This is your life. You need to feel confident with the advice that you're getting. Don't walk into a bank, sit down with a person and assume that they're your person, because you don't know that they are. You can interview people. You can make sure that you feel confident on their skills and capabilities. When you go to a bank, there's typically a multitude of different people you're going to connect with. There's going to be personal bankers, personal banking associates, financial planners. All of them are going to have a different level of advice and skill sets and knowledge. So understanding what they do first is really important. So you're connecting with somebody, and maybe you've made a call, you've gone to your bank, you're saying, hey, I want to sit down with somebody. I've got questions about my finances. I want to set myself up for success. Can you book a meeting with me? Great. They should ask you what you want to talk about and then book you with the appropriate person. But you go in and you say, tell me a little bit about your role. Tell me about what you do. What products do you sell? What advice can you give? What's your level of knowledge? How long have you been in the bank? What did you do before that? Do you have any designations behind your name? Understand who they are and what it is that they can do for you. If you're early on in your career or just getting out of school, you really only need a personal banker to help you with your debt management and your investments. But their knowledge is limited. And so as you grow your assets and maybe you're transitioning to a home, then you're going to need to upskill into the next person. A financial financial planner, when you hear the name financial planner, they typically have a CFP or a PFP designation. So they've done extra schooling to understand a more in-depth, comprehensive strategy. They're going to build out a plan that's reasonable and appropriate for you. So the first step is, connect with your bank, because they're where you've chosen to put your money. Do an interview. And if you don't like that person, don't work with them. Go find somebody else. Go do some homework. I had a client recently who reached out to me through my website and said, look, I'm with TD. I've got a financial planner. I don't think it's right. Can we sit down and have a conversation? And so we did. And at the end of the day, I say, if I'm the right person for you, great. And if I'm not, I want to find you the right person. So we'll connect you with somebody else until you feel like it's right. You want the person that you're working with, you want to feel confident that you can be candid, that you can be very transparent about what's going on in your life, that they have your interests in heart, not the bank's, not what they're going to sell you as a product, and that they're actually regurgitating back. They can say to you, this is what sounds like is important to you. Am I correct? Yeah? Okay. Well, let's get you set up on the right path. I hope that makes sense. Interview them like they're a job, because at the end of the day, if they're a planner that you're going to work with for the next 10, 15 years, you want to make sure it's the right person you got in your corner.
Well, that was amazing. Wow, do I feel so much more enlightened about my financial future as well. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Danica and Helen. That was amazing. There's a lot of people who stuck with us right till here till 8:30 to have their questions answered. Thank you, everybody, for participating, for asking such great questions, such a plethora, such a wide variety of questions. So it's really nice to see that we had a wide variety of participants attend this session. Know that we will be following up with an email that will have a copy of the recording of this that will be posted on our YouTube channel. So you can watch this again, because there's a lot of good information there. You may want to take some notes. Please look at these. I hope you've looked at these financial literacy resources so you can become more financially literate, as Danica and Helen were both saying. So this is our last Tuesdays with TD for this particular year. We'll be looking back in the fall with some new and exciting topics as well. Thank you, everybody, for participating. We really appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Many thanks to TD Insurance, our affinity partner, and everybody have a wonderful evening. Thanks so much for sticking around with us.
Thanks,
Good night.
guys. Have a great evening.